Hey everyone, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in the last third of June. So this is like part 3 of my June wrap-up. These are all books that I read from June 21st to the 30th, and I'm also going to be reviewing all the other books I read in June. If you haven't seen my other 2 June wrap-ups, I will have them linked above if you are interested, but just as like a quick summary of what I read, what my favorite books were, I'm just going to quickly go over all of the other ones as well. So June was a pretty good reading month. I ended up reading around 23 books, and I'm very happy with that number. I did read a lot the first week and a half of June, and then it's kind of slowed down, which is completely fine. I didn't want to read as much and cause another big reading slump just because Jane Austen July actually starts today. So I wanted to be able to just dive into a bunch of books for Jane Austen July without feeling like, oh my gosh, I just finished like 5 other books, and I just didn't want to feel burned out in that sense. So in the last 10 days, I read 5 books, which again, it's a great number I'm very happy with. And overall, I enjoyed each and every one of them, so I'm really excited to talk about them. But before I talk about the books I read the most recently, I'm just going to quickly summarize the other books I read in June. So I first read Beauty of Darkness, which I gave 3.5 stars. This is YA fantasy, and I overall very much enjoyed it. I read another YA fantasy, which is Dreams Lie Beneath, which I gave 4.5 stars to and absolutely loved. This book was so beautiful. I read a historical fiction called With This Pledge, which I gave 4 stars to and very much enjoyed. I then read The Paris Library, which I didn't enjoy as much. It's historical fiction, but I ended up giving it 2 stars. The Lioness, I gave 3 stars to. This is a very gruesome thriller. I enjoyed the African savannah setting and all those descriptions, and I enjoyed that it took place in the 1960s, but it was just a bit too gruesome for me. Then I read Kilmeny of the Orchard, which I gave 3 stars to. It is definitely not one of Ella Montgomery's stronger books. I read this precious graphic novel, When the Stars Are Scattered, and absolutely loved it. I gave it 4 stars. I gave 3 stars to A Caribbean Mystery by Agatha Christie, and this is a Miss Marple, and Miss Marple is actually very important to the plot in this one. I had read a couple Miss Marples before where she just wasn't given as much page time, and that kind of disappointed me, but with this one she was definitely there for the whole book. I read Fellowship of the Ring, which I actually buddy read with Amanda, and I had such a great time with this one. I gave it 4 stars. I read Lost in Darkness, which is kind of inspired by Frankenstein, and Frankenstein is one of my favorite classics of all time, so I was really excited to read this one, and I loved it. I think the little nods to Frankenstein and Mary Shelley were perfect. I ended up giving this 4 stars, and I had buddy read this with Holly, which I'm so glad we buddy read it. And Lost in Darkness is a historical fiction as well, set in the Regency era. Then I read a contemporary called Beyond the Tides, and I gave this one 3 stars. And this was our Christian book club pick for June. I read a manga, which I don't read very much of, but I ended up giving it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, and that one is Wolf Children. Then I read East of Eden, which is a classic American novel. Like, a lot of people have read it in school. I never have. So I finally read it, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read A Georgette Hare, which I enjoyed more than I was expecting to because I had heard pretty bad things about this book. A lot of people have given it 1 star just because of how silly it is, but I personally had a great time with that silliness, and it was just a lot of fun. So I gave Powder and Patch 3 stars. Then I read a biblical fiction by my absolute favorite biblical fiction author out there. I read Potiphar's Wife, and I gave it 4 stars. I definitely enjoyed it, and I felt the characterization of Potiphar's wife, Zuleika, was just spot on. It was beautiful. I think I was just in a bit of a slump, and it definitely affected my reading because different slumps will, make it harder for me to read different genres, even if they're genres I love. So I kind of pushed through with that one, but I was buddy reading it with Katie, and we had some really great discussions about the book. So I'm still very glad I read it. 4 stars is a great rating. And then I read Magpie Murders, which is a murder mystery, and it has like a story within a story. So the story within the story takes place in the 50s, and then you have modern day, and it was a very interesting story. I gave it 3.5 stars. I read The Bridge to Belle Island, which is a Regency era romance, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. I really liked the characters, but I did guess the mystery, so that one gets 3.5 stars. I read A Town Like Alice with a group of ladies from BookTube, and I had such a great time with the first half. The second half kind of went downhill, but I still gave it 4 stars because I feel this book is like, I'm still thinking about it. Like, it really, really impacted me, especially the first half of the book. It takes place during and then post World War II, and we have a group of women that are basically taken prisoner, but they're forced to like walk hundreds and hundreds of kilometers in Malaysia, and the story is just incredible. Very, very impactful. And so those are all the books that I read from June 1st to the 20th, and then I will also go over the 5 books I read in the last 10 days. Before I do, I just wanted to talk about some DNFs from this month because I had forgotten to mention them in the last 2 videos, and I DNF'd a lot in June. Mid-June, I hit the biggest reading slump I think I've ever been in, and yet I just kept reading because I was trying all these books, like what's gonna get me out of a slump. And so I ended up trying, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different books that all got a DNF for me. I had to put all of them down because I just wasn't feeling them. And like, I shouldn't feel guilty about DNFing, but I still struggle with that. Like, I feel so bad. Like, I start a book, why can't I just finish it? But recently I've been finding it harder and harder to power through when I'm not enjoying a book. And I feel the most guilt when it's like a classic, because with classics, you kind of have to power through some of the time, and it is what it is. Anyways, so the first book I DNF'd was Dragon Slayer Beginnings, and this was actually sent to me by the author, and I just wasn't really vibing with the writing style. Like, the story itself, it just wasn't for me, so I decided to put it down. I DNF'd Tom Sawyer. I tried, but with children's classics, it really, really depends on the classic. It really depends on the story, and I just didn't like Tom, and I didn't want to have to follow him and his shenanigans and all that. Like, I'm very, very picky with children's classics, so that one I'm not going to read. I DNF'd Robinson Crusoe. I did not like the writing style, and I could care less what happened to the main character. I just wasn't enjoying it. And then I DNF'd Circling the Sun, and this is not a permanent DNF. I actually was really interested, but I just wasn't quite in the mood for historical fiction when I picked it up, and so I just, you know, set it down, and I could definitely pick it up again because it sounded very, very interesting. So there's that one. And then I DNF'd a nonfiction, and I really, really struggle with nonfiction. Like, the writing needs to be very, very captivating for me to want to continue reading. With nonfiction, it just puts me in the mindset of school, and that stresses me out. Just like, oh, I have to learn something, I have to study, and I don't like that. I want to read for enjoyment. So I put down The Poisoner's Handbook. The writing style in this one it was very, very bland, and I just wasn't enjoying it, and I was hoping to because it deals with some true crime, which I really, really love. So it wasn't for me. And I also DNF'd Waterfall, which I actually read when I was maybe 11 or 12, and I remember loving it. And I think this is the book that made me realize that I really like time travel. It is super, super young adult, and I just was not in the mood to follow very immature protagonists at this time. I may pick the book up again because I never read the 4th book in the series or like the 2 novellas, but we'll see. We'll see about that one. All right, so now on to the books that I did finish in the last 10 days. I'm so sorry that intro took very, very long, but I finally had the courage to pick up another Shakespeare play. So for me, it is very, very difficult to read Shakespeare just because I'm that type of person. Like, I need to understand every single word that is spoken. If I don't understand a word, like vocabulary, grammatical structures, it just stresses me out, and I feel like I'm missing something from the story, from the play in this case. But when I do pick up Shakespeare, I never regret it just because I love plays. I love, love, love the theater. Like, I would much rather go see a play than a movie. That's how I am. And I realized that in high school. So I was reading Shakespeare in high school. I read a few plays, and it was very, very difficult, but like that feeling of accomplishment when you finish and then you go see the play in person, like the field trips we would take, I loved it so, so much. And so I know that if I continue reading Shakespeare, I'm just gonna, it's gonna make me so happy. And I definitely want to read the plays before I go see them in person. And so besides the ones that I've read in high school, I read one last year, and then in this month I read Othello. Now this book is the Norton Critical Edition, and it has a ton of notes. So just like this chunk of the book is notes and like context on the play and like a critical essay and everything. So the play itself doesn't take up a lot of the book. It's not very, very long. But I did take my time with it just because the language, it's very, very challenging, and I did not have access to the like No Fear Shakespeare, which is like the modern English translation. I tried to find it online, but SparkNotes only had like the first bit of it, and then the rest you have to pay for. So I pushed through, and this edition actually has really great notes at the bottom. So I found it very, very helpful and was able to understand what was happening. So in this book, we have Othello, who is a general, and he's called the Moor of Venice. And we have his standard bearer. I don't know exactly what his role is. I didn't really understand that part, but we have Othello's standard bearer, who is named Iago, and he is the villain of this story. And he's very bitter towards Othello because he didn't promote him to, I guess, a higher rank. And he decides to take revenge on Othello. So this whole story is basically a revenge plot, and Iago convinces Othello that his wife Desdemona is unfaithful, and it leads Othello on a downward spiral mentally. And Othello ends up extremely jealous of his wife, jealous of the man who he believes to be sleeping with his wife. And Othello basically just allows this jealousy to take control of him. I'm going to talk a little bit about this play with spoilers, so I'll have spoilers written on the screen if you are still interested in reading it and haven't yet. But I just found it so funny how Othello was so gullible and believed Iago and believed everything this villain was, saying. And do you seriously have that little of a backbone that you would believe your wife is cheating on you and believe it with absolutely no evidence? Like, the evidence was circumstantial at best. Like, I just wanted to slap Othello on the face. He wouldn't even give her the chance to prove to him that she didn't cheat on him. And then he's like in this murderous rage and decides that killing her is going to solve all his problems. And then he realizes that she was telling the truth, and then he's like, oh, woe is me, I'm gonna kill myself now. Like, I love how this is the tragedy of Othello, but to me it was comedic because it was just so ridiculous. I just think Othello was very, very foolish, but I ended up really enjoying it. I gave it 4 stars, and yeah, it was a wild ride. This is one I definitely want to see in person. I think it would be a lot of fun. Yeah, 4 stars, very, very much enjoyed it. I then read Deadly Devotion by Sandra Orchard, and this is a Christian romantic suspense novel. And in this one, we have our protagonist named Kate, and she is a research assistant working with this woman named Daisy. They work with herbal treatments for depression, and they're trying to find a cure for depression, basically. And then Daisy ends up dead. It is believed to be suicide, but Kate does not believe that Daisy would have committed suicide, and so she kind of becomes like this amateur sleuth trying to discover how Daisy was actually killed because she believes it was murder. And she tries to get this policeman to help her, and his name is Tom. And so Kate goes to the police station asking for his help. She's begging him to reopen this investigation, and he really can't because his police chief does not approve and believes it was suicide. But Kate just continues trying to uncover clues and tries to figure out who killed Daisy. And so right off the bat, and this isn't really a spoiler, but the reader knows that it couldn't have been suicide just because of various factors, and you're joining Kate trying to figure out who killed Daisy because she was on the brink of this discovery of how to cure depression, and she was a woman of faith, and why would she go and commit suicide? And so honestly, the author did an amazing job at casting suspicion on different people, and I could not have guessed the final outcome of this story. I mean, maybe I could have, but I didn't. I found the story to be so interesting, and we got to learn a little bit about different herbs and what they do in the body, and so that aspect of it was very, very interesting to me. Kate is a very strong-willed protagonist, and she, will stop at nothing to prove that her friend did not commit suicide, and she just has this drive for justice, and I really, really enjoyed following her in that regard. And her romance with Tom was honestly not as cheesy as I was expecting it to be, so I definitely appreciated that. And overall, I really enjoyed the book, and I gave it 4 stars. I then reread 2 books that I consider to be favorites, and so I reread The Goose Girl and Enna Burning, which are the first 2 books in the Books of Bayern series. So first we have The Goose Girl, and in this one we have Princess Ani, who was born with the ability to communicate with animals, specifically a horse. So if she's present at the birth of that horse and hears the first word on his tongue, she's able to communicate with him. And so she ends up forming a very special bond with this horse named Falada, and They're able to communicate, and it's one of the most precious things ever. But one day people start to notice more and more of her gift, and it makes them very uncomfortable. And so she ends up being sent away from the city that she lives in with her family, which is Kildare. She ends up being sent to Bayern to marry the Prince of Bayern. But along the way, her maid actually ends up taking on Ani's identity. And so Ani ends up in Bayern working as a goose girl, just trying to survive, and the story goes from there. It is such a precious book. Oh my goodness. It's honestly one of my absolute favorite fairy tale retellings, hands down. I just loved it so much, and I'm so glad I reread it. I needed this reread. I really, really needed it. So definitely loved this one. And I gave it 5 stars. And then the next one, Enna Burning, when I first read it, I actually gave it 4 stars. This time around, I gave it 4.5 stars. I enjoyed it a little bit more, and I'm so, so glad that I did. So in this one, we have Enna, and she's best friends with Ani from the first book. They actually call her Izzy, so I was calling her Ani, but she goes by Izzy. And so in this book, Enna is living in the forest with her brother, and her brother discovers the ability to manipulate fire. The issue with this ability is it's very difficult to control, but he ends up losing control of this power with crazy, crazy repercussions, and Bayern is actually at war with another kingdom. And so Enna discovers how to use fire, and that also has some consequences. And this book is very, very good. I really liked that Enna was kind of almost shown as like a morally gray character, even though she's technically the protagonist. I really, really enjoyed that. And yeah, I ended up enjoying it a lot more this time around, which I'm very, very thrilled with. I was actually nervous that I wouldn't enjoy it as much, but that was not the case. So 4.5 stars. And the last book I finished in June was Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte, and I loved this. It was so sweet, so just pure, and like a very, very easy, quick classic, which I am very glad that it was. And so in this one, we have the Grey family, and Agnes's father ends up basically losing all his money. They end up impoverished because he invested in something that ended up sinking to the bottom of the ocean, literally. So they're impoverished, his health suffers, and Agnes decides to work as a governess to try to, provide for her family. And in this book, Agnes ends up working with a couple different families. So the first family doesn't last very long. They are terrible human beings. She ends up working for the Bloomfield family, and they have young children who they drove me insane, to say the least. If any of you guys have watched the Little House on the Prairie show and know Harriet and Nels Olsen, the Bloomfield mother is literally Harriet Olsen, and the children are Nellie and Willie, like 100%. Drove me insane. Couldn't stand them. And poor Agnes, she couldn't either, but she basically tried to keep her mouth shut because she didn't want to lose this position. But it ended up coming to an end, and she ends up working for another family, the Murrays. And with this family, her pupils are actually older, so they're older teenagers, and you'd expect them to be more mature, but they are not. So they drive her insane. But she's kind of that kind of person that like picks her battles, and she knows that some things are just not worth, fighting over, and she's just a very respectful person. But you could feel her rage and her anger as she's interacting with these people. Oh my gosh, they are so petty, just terrible humans. But because of her work with the Murrays, she ends up meeting the local curate, and little romance blossoms, and it's so sweet. Mr. Weston, they honestly, like, this romance was the sweetest thing. For such a short book though, there are a couple parts that I felt a little bit bored reading, but overall I gave this 4 stars. I really, really enjoyed it, and the ending was precious. So those are all the books that I read in June, and I actually have a couple that I started in June but will be continuing them on in the next couple months. So first off, we have Ross Poldark, and this one I started in June, but after uploading my Jane Austen July TBR, I realized that this actually kind of works for one of the prompts, because one of them is to read a book set during Jane Austen's time, and this book technically fits that because it is set during the Georgian period, so it's the late 18th century. And so I'll just continue reading it throughout July and count it, I guess, towards Jane Austen July. But I'm loving it so much. I actually have watched the show, and I had no idea there were books. And when I found out there were books, oh my gosh, I was so excited. But I love this book. And honestly, it just makes me appreciate the show even more, because every single character in this book, the cast, like, they were cast perfectly in the show, like perfection. Like, I can picture every single character, their mannerisms, just everything, especially Ross. Perfect. I'm not one to crush on characters in books, but he's an exception. I also started The Count of Monte Cristo, and I don't have my copy on me right now, but this one I wasn't sure if I wanted to start just because a bunch of ladies on BookTube are doing like a read along, and they started at the beginning of June, and I just was very intimidated. And also I tried reading The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas and did not like it. So I ended up picking up The Count of Monte Cristo a couple weeks after everyone else started it. So I'll see if I can, you know, catch up, but I'm not going to prioritize it as much in July just because of Jane Austen July. But once August rolls around, I will definitely prioritize this book. And I am really enjoying it so far. So I'm really, really glad that I decided to pick it up and just go for it. I definitely like it a lot more than The Three Musketeers. So there's that one. So that is it for this video. Those are all the books I read in June. And I thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you guys for taking time out of your day to watch me ramble. I can get very long-winded. So thank you very much. Anyways, I hope to see you all in my next video. And I hope you're all having an amazing day wherever you are in the world. Bye.